so many ways, voters are still digesting the events from Wednesday, the riots on the US Capitol, which is really the seat of American democracy and American government, and symbolically was a very shocking event. This has raised many questions around President Trump and whether or not he incited the violence, or whether these were just the actions of an unruly mob, a question that we polled together with the Hill, and also questions around responsibility and how to deal or how to exact, if you will, accountability for what happened on Wednesday. And Democrats have raised both the specter of the 25th Amendment and have applied pressure on Vice President Pence to bring up the 25th Amendment or trigger the 25th Amendment, something that he replied pretty swiftly and said he will not be doing. And both Pelosi and Schumer have then said that if the 25th Amendment is not invoked by the cabinet, then they would look into drafting articles of impeachment. It's interesting to see how voters reacted on both questions, and they were very split, right? We asked the questions, if you will, from a functional perspective. Do you think that there's grounds to impeach Donald Trump based on his handling of the events, the riots on Wednesday? And from a general voter reaction, it was split 49-51, which is a statistical split. However, the issue breaks very strongly amongst partisan lines. So Republicans, 8 in 10 Republicans said, no, there is no grounds. 8 in 10 Democrats said, yes, there are grounds. And independents were actually quite split on the issue, again, within the margin of statistical difference. And I believe that number was 48-52 for independents. 52, yes, there are grounds to impeach, and 48, no, there aren't. And then on the question of invoking the 25th Amendment, a similar response. Voters were split 49-51. 49% said yes, there are grounds for triggering the 25th Amendment, and 51% said no. Republicans and Democrats were split almost exactly as they were split on the impeachment question. So 8 in 10 Republicans were against invoking the 25th Amendment, 8 in 10 Democrats for, and independents were split. Public opinion still hasn't settled. Obviously, the events were very shocking, and the electorate is split on a set of questions. In terms of who they blame, as I mentioned, we asked a direct question: do you think President Trump incited the violence and the riots, or were these the actions of an unruly mob? And 45% of voters said it was President Trump, and 55% of voters said it was the actions of an unruly mob. So a majority say it was the actions of an unruly mob, although when you have 45% of voters believing that the president incited the mob, that's a pretty significant finding in and of itself, even though it's not the majority of the voter base. And I think that it pays to remember that Republicans and his own voter base are still sticking by the president. They perceive the president as fighting to the very end to protect their votes. And there is an overwhelming misimpression, and I'll call it misimpression because the courts have ruled on the issue, and the allegations of fraud and malfeasance around the election, there wasn't any proof that the courts could find. Despite all of that, there is this misimpression that exists amongst Trump voters and a good number of Republican voters that there was election fraud. and there's a lot of misinformation that is flying around amongst the 74 million voters that voted for President Trump. He received the second highest number of votes of any presidential candidate, winner or loser, in American history. So at root here is these voters thinking that Trump is fighting all the way to the end to protect their vote. At root here is a political problem, which is you can't have a significant group of voters think that the elections were not conducted fairly. Otherwise, you have issues of legitimacy and authority that could have a lot of unintended consequences and ripple effects. And I think that this is something that will be us for months to come and for years to come.